So one place that we got a chance to visit while we were serving in the country of Peru as missionaries is Machu Picchu, and you may have seen this on Discovery Channel or that kind of thing. It's this very remote fortress, temple, castle, retreat center for the ancient Incas that's kind of located in the jungle area around Cusco. And it was rediscovered 100 years or so ago and has become this really brilliant tourist destination in South America. And so we went there once and spent a little time walking over all these old rocks. And people go there because they're interested in the history and they're interested in the great views and they love all the flora and fauna. But also people go there because it's kind of got this mystique about it. And Machu Picchu seems like this place where you might pick up some good vibes. And so people kind of take this neo-pagan pilgrimage there to try to soak in the spirit of the earth or something like that. And I don't know about that, but the Incas, it was interesting. The Incas were really good at working with water. That was part of their genius and what allowed them to conquer so many people from all the way from Colombia all the way down to Chile. And the Incas were good at working with water. And up on Machu Picchu, they had channeled these streams and these springs so that there were a couple of places, and you get a picture of one right there, where the water would flow down and would kind of gush in different ways across the stones. And while we were there, we found one of these places. We were checking it out and looking at this intricate stonework and how the water is flowing. And we saw some people filling up their bottles with this, right? And you're kind of imagining like, wow, this sacred water from Machu Picchu or something like that. You know, if you're into going to Machu Picchu as a spiritual center, well, this must be some pretty special water. And so we followed the water up, and Elijah kind of walked up and followed where the water went. And you might imagine that there'd be this spring of bubbling, crystal clear water coming up out of the ancient stone with butterflies and hummingbirds flying around it. But at the head of this little channel, we found a garden hose. And the water was coming out of the hose and going down through this ancient stonework, and there it is. And people are down at the bottom thinking, man, they've got themselves some special water, but hose water. And who knows, maybe they're just pumping it up from the municipal water source down in the valley or something like that. Years and years ago, 500 years ago, it would have been the real thing. But you know what? Here we are in this moment in our time where there are lots of different wells out there that are tempting to drink from, but some of them are not the real thing. And Jesus calls us back to drink from the source. Jesus says, don't get distracted, don't get taken in by some of these sources of water, drink from the source. And he says, I'm the source, I give the living water as a gift, come back to me. And Jesus invites us to that. You see him saying that here in John chapter 4. He's saying, come back to the well and be refreshed in me. And this is a really powerful passage. I love this passage. If you want to follow along, that'd be great. There's some notes on the right-hand side of your bulletin. But Jesus is going with his disciples, right? And they have gone through the Samaritan territories, and they stop at this area outside of a town called Sychar. And Jesus is waiting there, as we see in verse 8, his disciples go into the town to buy food. And the Samaritans, of course, we know that they are a different group of people, but a Samaritan woman comes up in verse 7, and Jesus says to her, will you give me a drink? Because we can kind of imagine Jesus is traveling. He does not go around with a bucket, and the traditional way that you get water out of the well is you come with your jar or your bucket, hook it onto the rope, lower it down, get your water, and go back to town. Well, Jesus doesn't have that. He says, will you give me a drink? And it's interesting because the Samaritan woman, she picks up that he is not from around here right away. In verse 9, she says, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? And in parentheses, John, the author, kind of adds this, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans, right? And so we know this, that Jews do not associate with Samaritans, and they've even got different places where they worship, and we'll go back to that in a second. But in verse 20, we know that they worship in a different place than Jews do. And this is one of those things that goes back to ancient times. You can read about the history of the Samaritans if you look in the history books of 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. And the Samaritans were, when the country of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, was divided in two after the death of Solomon, David's son. The northern kingdom got called Israel, and the southern kingdom, because it was the tribe of Judah with Benjamin kind of inside of them, they became known as Judah, right? And so the northern kingdom, Israel, gets wiped out by the Assyrians, and all those Israelites get deported, and they pretty much disappear, except for a few that are left there. And Assyria has this policy of sending in new people to settle the land because they want somebody to grow crops and they can collect tribute from them. So they send in new people who speak a different language and worship different gods and are not from there. It doesn't go well from them. And then you see that the Assyrians ask the people of Judea to send up some priests of the God of the land, the God of Israel, to teach them how to worship properly. And those folks, their descendants become the Samaritans, which Samaria is that place. Maybe it has to do with the verb in Hebrew for watching or keeping or guarding, the samar. But they are the people who live in this region of Samaria. They're kind of like Jews and have some of the similar scriptures, have some similar worship practices, but yet they're different. And the Jews knew this from the beginning. They're outsiders. They look different and they speak differently, and they worship on a different mountain. They're not worshiping in Jerusalem. And so this woman, right away, she says, what are you talking to me for, right? Because I'm from Samaria, and I'm a woman, and you're from Judea. You're a Jew, and you're a man, so what are you talking to me for? But Jesus uses this very basic kind of a conversation to call her into a deeper view of what's going on and invite her to drink from the source. And she says, later in verse 20, that our fathers worshipped on this mountain, which is Mount Gerizim, and the Jews claim that you've got to worship in Jerusalem. And the Samaritans got this from Deuteronomy 11:29, which is a place where God says he's going to make Mount Gerizim a mountain of blessing. And they stuck to that. They said, look, this is a mountain of blessing. This is where we're going to worship. This is where God has placed his name. But the Jews said all worship has been collected together into Jerusalem. That is the only legitimate place to worship. And the interesting thing is that there are still Samaritans to this day in the Holy Land. There aren't very many of them, but there are still Samaritans out there. And Jesus has this conversation with him. And I detect that it's a little bit of a frustrated conversation on the woman's part, because in verse 11, right, she says, you have nothing to draw with you from the well, and the well is very deep. In other words, where's your bucket, right? And why are you talking to me? And then verse 12, do you think that you are greater than Jacob? Because Jesus says he's the living water. Do you think you're greater than Jacob and Jacob's sons and Jacob's flocks who all drank from this well? But this is a physical thirst she's talking about, and Jesus points her to the spiritual thirst, something deeper. And he says in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. Right? And so we have this moment where Jesus is inviting her to the living water, and this is what really starts it off, because we have the question of what is the living water? And the woman is dealing with Jesus on the literal level, because as far as she can tell, she's really the one who is calling the shots in this situation. She's in charge because she's got the bucket. She's on her home turf. She knows who her ancestors are. She's got her traditions. And this Jesus, he's showing up here, and he doesn't even have a bucket, right? Who does he think he is? But Jesus points her to something beyond that. And I don't want to overdo the interpretation on this, but you get a couple of clues about who this woman might have been. So for instance, she shows up alone. Does that mean that she could have been kind of an outcast, because it would have been common for the women to go together to the well? Does this mean that she is a little bit on the margins and doesn't have anybody to go with her to the well? And then Jesus, when he's in conversation with her, he says, go and get your husband. And then verse 18, we say, yes, that's true. Jesus says, that's true. You have had 5 husbands, and the man who you have now is not your husband. So she's breaking some of the social conventions. Maybe that put her outside of her community, and she was looked at askance. And so is this a little bit of a misfit who is meeting Jesus at this well and who he connects with here? And she's talking to him and is kind of carrying this baggage. Let's just say that that's who she is, and she's carrying this baggage. And she's not able to fully connect with Jesus. and not able to drink from the living water that he's calling her to. And if you look at verse 15, where he talks about living water, it's interesting her response. Because all she can think about is the practicalities of how she would like to not have to come to the well so often and would like this living water so she doesn't get thirsty. She's like, show me the water, right? Show me the water. I want this stuff. I don't want to have to come back to the well. And she's concerned about getting her day-to-day needs met. But I mean, why not? Right? Because when you are hungry or you're thirsty or you're in danger, you're trying to pay the bills, well, it's hard to think about spiritual stuff because you're just focusing on what is in front of you. I mean, who can talk spirituality when you're just scraping by? But these things sometimes can kind of be an obstacle to us, like maybe they were for the woman at the well, and they can be a little bit of a distraction to us, and we can think that only the things that are in front of us matter. The food and the shelter, the work and the water. And we can forget that we are made for something bigger and that even in the most difficult circumstances, we are longing for something deep. We are made of dust, right? We are made of the dust of the earth, and so we worry and we have all these concerns and we need food and shelter and water and air and all of these things. But we are not just dust. We are also stamped with the image of the invisible God, and we have the Spirit of God breathed into us. And so we long for a farther horizon, and we long for something more than dust. We look for meaning and have a thirst that goes deeper than just the immediate. And Jesus is trying to tip this woman off to that, and he meets her where she's at, but also wants to lead her into something deeper, to the living water that only he gives. And in our society, we are tempted by so many different wells, it seems to me. That there are many different possibilities out there that we think could be the source of meaning, could be the living water. But that in fact, when we really get into their source, we realize that they're just the drippings from a garden hose. And Jesus is pointing us towards the true well that is him and saying, come and drink. And I think that one of these things that can kind of distract us from the living water, from him, is busyness. And you see this even a little bit with the woman, right? This is her first concern, like, help me meet my needs, help me concentrate on what's right in front of me, help me make this possible to not have to come out here and fetch this water. And in our society, it's busyness, and I think we sometimes wear our busyness as a badge of pride, don't we? Because we're like, if you can't do something, you say, I'm busy. That's like a very noble kind of a thing to say, or at least that's how I've experienced it. I mean, whoever has the fullest calendar is the most important, right? And we know the risks of busyness. We know what happens with lack of sleep and overwork and lack of attention to the relationships that matter most to us. But the opposite, not doing, can seem like the scariest thing in the world to us sometimes. And this is a place where I think we risk falling into the sin of boredom. Did you know that boredom can sometimes be a sin? I mean, it's what it is failing to be present to what is going on around us, failing to notice the marvelous beauty that God has packed into a moment in a situation. And I'll tell you that I am guilty of this. I get bored easily, and this is not one of my better traits. But busyness is a false well. It is not the living water. And it is a very swift-flowing stream, and so it can give us the impression that there is something true going on there, that it is living water, and it can be exciting to have a lot of things going on in our lives. But I think that in the end, busyness is just a big, complicated way of saying the same thing that the woman at the well said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't have to come here and draw this water anymore." Busyness can become just this manic focus on the things that are going on around us, the dusty things, the stuff of life, that don't lead us to meaning, that just lead us to stress. Have you ever experienced stress? And we know that we need something more, right, than the hubbub of life. And that we know that somewhere inside of us there's this thirst for something that is deeper and truer. And we know that busyness won't cut it. And we know that it's not the living water when it comes right down to it. And we know that we're not just dust. We're living breath of God's Spirit longing for his water to awaken us and refresh us. And I think that even people who have arrived they carry around within them this sense that there is more going on. And this is why you see folks that seemingly have it all, the money and the fame and the wealth and the friends, that they still wake up in the morning, and some of them are face to face with this kind of desperation. And I personally think this is why you see such tragic situations like what happened with actor Robin Williams, who is at the pinnacle of his career, but then still felt that sense of desperation, obviously, and took his own life very sadly. I mean, we know that even in the midst of busyness, there's got to be something more, but we've got to kind of be jogged towards that and led towards that and focused on Jesus, where we can come and drink his living water. And I don't know, I mean, the busyness is one piece of it, and there's another one here. There's another risk. And I see this woman, again, I don't want to overinterpret her situations, but I see this woman, and she kind of comes to Jesus, and she's respectful. She calls him Lord or Sir. But on the other hand, she's also saying, like, where's your bucket? Do you think you're greater than Jacob? Why are you talking to me? And I feel that there could be a little bit of grumbling or complaint. And this is really the second thing that we can fall into, this complaining, this discontent. And there can be a discontent that's very positive, that makes us question things and look for a better way, and especially where injustice is involved. Discontent can be prophetic. But there's also a negative discontent, and the symptom of it is complaining and it's grumbling. And complaining and grumbling can be a kind of deadly poison, because they start to impact how we see everything. I mean, have you ever seen this or experienced this, right? That if you complain about one thing, it sort of flows into the rest of your life, and you complain about everything. I mean, just try to go an hour without complaining, or try to go a whole day without complaining. There's a guy on the internet who's selling these little rubber bracelets, like that little Live Strong kind of a bracelet, but it's something that he created that if you put the bracelet on one hand, and if you complain, you're supposed to move it over to the other. And that's supposed to make you more aware and attentive to how we so easily fall into complaining. And I don't know, maybe that would work. We might find ourselves moving them back and forth quite a lot. But the idea is that often we fall into discontent, and that in fact our society encourages discontent. This is the whole purpose of the advertising industry, is to make us think that we need something, that you are not content with what you have and who you are. You need to buy this car, and you need to go to this store and wear these clothes, and you need this beer and this vacation to be happy. And so there's so much static out there that's creating discontent in us that sometimes I think we just breathe it in and drink it down and soak it up so that we're saturated with discontent. And discontent, it's delicious, right? I mean, discontent can sometimes just feel so good because it gives us a sense of entitlement and a sense of privilege, because somebody, the waiter or the UPS driver or the president or the pastor has not met our needs, has not lived up to our expectations, and so we feel this kind of sense of privilege that they have to do something to make me feel right, to meet my needs. And so discontent can feel kind of delicious and can be like sugar going down. But just like sugar, if you've got a lot of it, it'll kill you. And I think Jesus encounters this woman here at the well who's got a little bit of discontent, right? And maybe she's wondering, like, who are you to talk to me? And where's your bucket? And why do you think you're better than Jacob? But Jesus is saying, wait, hold on. Let me point you back to the source, towards the well that matters and to that living water. Come and be refreshed in me. And I think all of us can complain, but then we don't like it when somebody complains about us. And you see that here too when Jesus says, go and fetch your husband to the women. He doesn't even really get to the level of complaining or anything. He says, just go fetch your husband. Then she changes the subject, right? I see that you are a prophet. And so Jesus is changing the subject in a big way for her and saying, be refreshed in me. He's saying, come and get this free gift of God, this living water. And if you look at the whole sweep of Scripture, In the scriptures, the water is always symbolic of the Spirit or of grace or of the life of God, and many times all of those things at once. Because when the Spirit of God flows into our lives, we experience His grace and we share in His life. And you see this in the Gospel of John at the very end, when Jesus dies on the cross and they stab Him in the side in John 19:34. Do you remember this? What flows out? Blood, but also water. And that might be a literal vision of what John saw, but I think the way John describes it is to key us into this source of living water that is flowing out of Jesus, because John knows the Old Testament, and he knows that in Ezekiel, the temple itself is going to be a source of water to replenish the land, like flowing out of the temple. So he sees Jesus as being that new and renewed source of water. And in the Old Testament, you see living water. I mean, even if you look in the Apocrypha, in Sirach says that the law of God and the wisdom of God, they're a flowing stream of living water. Or think even about the gospel, or the revelation of John, where at the end of John, in chapter 19, or chapter 21, at the end of the revelation of John, Jesus speaks, and he says, "The Spirit and the bride say, 'Come.' And let anyone who hears say, 'Come.' And let anyone who is thirsty come. Let anyone who wishes receive the water of life as a gift." Right? A free gift. And it's echoing these same words that Jesus spoke to the woman at the well. This image of coming to Him and being refreshed. I mean, think of Isaiah chapter 55. Come, buy and eat. Come and drink the water that comes from God. And so here it is. The water of life welling up in Jesus, the true source, the open space to encounter God, His grace, His life. Come and drink. And so He's pointing us back to that, to being refreshed in His true stream, to being energized because we encounter Him, the one who is really real, the one who gives us meaning, the one in whom we are content. And Jesus names two places here in this passage in His conversation with the woman of Samaria where we can find that living water. Two places we can come and drink. One is worship, the other is faith. And verse 24, where Jesus speaks to the woman a little bit about where Samaritans worship, where Jews worship, it's a very famous verse, right? He says that God is spirit. The time's coming, right? He says in verse 23, we're not going to worship on this mountain or that mountain. God is spirit, he says in verse 24, and His worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. And this is not meaning that we can't have ritual or something like that. I mean, this whole chapter begins with ritual. They're talking about baptism and how Jesus and His disciples were baptizing, or how His disciples were doing the baptism, I should say, under His supervision. But it begins with ritual and assumes ritual. But what Jesus is getting at is that we are going to come as worshipers of God, and there's going to be this kind of renewed worship where we encounter Him and we bring our whole lives to Him. Everything that we are and do, our entire identities, and that we worship Him in spirit and in truth. And those of you who know me know that, I mean, by now that worship is kind of my answer for everything. But it's the beating heart of God's followers, of our life together as His people. And so I think that's why Jesus points us towards worship. He says, listen, you want to find the living water? Go and worship me. Go and worship in my name. That's where you're going to find me. And the other thing is that He talks about belief. And you really got to go a little farther down than our own passage that we read today, verse 41. Jesus stays in this village. He's teaching the people there, and we realize in verse 41, we hear that because of His words, many more became believers. They entered into belief. That is to say, they put their faith in Jesus because of His teaching. They learned to drink from the living water. And you see, I love this part, because you see this character development of the woman from Samaria. It's such a beautiful image here, where at the beginning she has distrust and doubt and wonders who He is. But as she sets aside some of her preconceived notions and her partialities and her prejudices, she begins to be able to enter into this teaching relationship with Him and to really hear Him and to really long for what He's teaching and to really want the living water. She comes to faith. She believes. And you know, in our society, faith and belief, a lot of times we treat those like synonyms for non-thinking or non-science or non-observation. But in a scriptural sense and in the deep tradition of the church, what faith is trust. And so when she learns to trust in Jesus, she's believing. When she learns to trust his words and to think that he's really the source for the living water, she is putting her faith in him. And so it's not that we don't think or have a critical mindset, but that we trust that Jesus truly is the source for living water. We put our faith in him and just come to him and seek him out. And I love how this plays out, because in verse 28, check this out. In verse 28, the Samaritan woman, she's convinced at this point, she's got to take action. And what does she do? She leaves her water jar, right? And she goes back to the town to tell to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I did. Could this be the Christ? So she leaves her water jar. And I think this is really the turning point, that hinge moment for her, because it's at that moment that she says, wait a minute, everything that's in front of me, my situation, my complaints, my doubts, my preconceived notions, I'm leaving those aside, and I'm just placing right in front of you, Jesus, this empty water jar. Fill it. Show me the water, because this is what I need. I need you. Come and refresh me. I'm giving everything up, and I'm just coming to you empty, and I'm saying, fill me. Fill this. That's the moment where she really puts her faith in him, I think. Those very simple and subtle words. She leaves her empty water jar and she takes off because she doesn't need anything else that could be in there except what Jesus could give her. And you know, I wonder how many of us have had this kind of fill my jar moment where we just leave our preconceived notions and partialities and prejudices and doubts, and we plunk down the empty jar before Jesus. We just say, help me. We just say, I need to drink from your flowing stream. I need your living water because I can't do it on my own. I wonder how many of us have had that, or who want that, or who need that. And I wonder if we can be the kind of people who just come like this woman and leave that empty jar and say, Jesus, it's up to you. Because this is the thing about water, it's essential for life. We cannot do anything without water. And the same goes for living water. We cannot do anything without it. We'll always do whatever we have to get water, because if you don't have water, none of the rest matters. I mean, just think about this a little bit. One of our experiences was that we lived in Washington State, right? In eastern Washington, which is very dry. Don't think Seattle, think desert. And it was very dry, and there really was never much of a population there until the government came and put in the Grand Coulee Dam. So 50, almost 60 years ago. And when the Grand Coulee Dam and this whole system of irrigation canals that they call coulees was put in, then people could come. Then Mennonites showed up from Kansas and Oregon and started farming the land, and other folks came there because then it was possible to have life because there was water. And the soil is rich, and that's why we can have these lovely Washington cherries and apples in the grocery store. But all of that is possible because of water, and we will do, in my experience, whatever it takes to get the water. Once we had some friends who, we went to their house, and they were doing some construction. The city was doing some construction behind their house and digging up the sewer system and water lines and whatever, so their water was shut off. And that went on for about a day. And at that point, you kind of need some water. And so they enlisted all of us to grab buckets and tubs and whatever we could and go over to a spigot that was down the block. And we all got water and all came walking back, sloshing water so that the kids could take a bath and wash some clothes and get a drink. Because if there's no water, there's nothing. And that's how it is with the living water. That's why we got to have Christ to fill us, because nothing is possible in our spiritual lives if we do not have the living water. If we're not tapping into that living water of Jesus' grace, there's not gratitude, forgiveness is not possible. None of that is. There's not love, there's not peace, there's not empathy, there's not self-understanding, there's not rest without the living water. And without living water, I think our souls just dry up and get wrinkly and desiccated and shrunken and become like prunes. And who wants to be a prune? Jesus gives us the living water. And without him, we just trying to make do. We're just trying to quench our thirst wherever we can, and without him, we're just missing out on the gushing, flowing, dousing, saturating water that comes from him. Because there is only one well. There is only one source. Everything else will leave us thirsty. Everything else will leave us dry. Everything else is just the drippings from a garden hose. Amen.